Hello, my name's Charlie Winston, and this is my podcast called As We Are, which is inspired by my most recent album, As I Am. It's discussions with people who interest me and inspire me. Some of those people you may know, but others you may never have heard of. But that's not the point, you see, because I'm simply interested in people. So, without further ado, I shall let you discover this episode. Take me as I am. This episode is with an old school friend of mine called Jonny Vaughan. Recently, I went back to England for a short vacation and we got together and I asked if he would do this podcast with me, as he has such an interesting story to tell. In the last 10 years, he has lived in Lilongwe, Malawi. With his partner Kate, they have single-handedly changed legislations around trafficking of endangered animals, and they've done a huge amount to enforce new laws and educational projects for the general wildlife and environment out there. He is the CEO of the Lilongwe Wildlife Trust, of which I'm very proud to call myself an ambassador, and he has a very interesting story to tell about his work out there in the last 10 years. Unfortunately, there are certain things we couldn't talk about due to it still being a bit sensitive, but there's still plenty in here that is worth listening to. So here's my conversation with Jonny Vaughan. So here we are in your house in England, and we're sitting with the fire, which is quite nice because it brings quite a nice sound in our ears. But we've known each other for, I think, about 30 years.
Yeah, 30 years probably.
That's a long time. So it's like you're one of my oldest mates, I'd say, since high school at least. And we spent a lot of time sitting around in front of fires. But I'd say drinking a lot of English tea, not your tisanes. But and spending a lot of time in pubs, chatting away, and a lot of time on the beach, just sort of looking at the sea. I think we could say it's fair to say that we spent a lot of our teenage years doing that
on boats, little sailboats.
Yeah, right.
A few little road trips thrown in.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, there's some funny ones. But then we went our own ways, really, and you, although we stayed in touch very intermittently, at some point you left England, like I've left England now, and you went to Africa. But you started off going to Africa by doing. In fact, what was the original reason you went? Was it to do the guiding?
Yeah, it was kind of guiding. It was to, after graduating with ecology, to go. The first sort of environmental job I could get was over in Swaziland doing sort of expedition leading, setting up ecological projects for local and international students, and then taking them after sort of the project phase finished, doing some basic research or things like that, taking them on expeditions, mountaineering or diving in Mozambique and travelling through southern African countries.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Was it for a company?
That was for a company, and the research part was for some of the local organisations.
Was it Quest? Is that what it was called?
Yeah, it was called, the expedition company was called Quest Overseas, yeah. But I don't think they exist anymore.
Really? So did you, then you were going to different countries all over South Africa. South of Africa.
Southern Africa, yeah. Yeah, several. So Swaziland, Botswana, Mozambique, and Zambia mainly.
And why? Why did you decide that was the path to take at that point in time?
Well, I mean, to be honest, when you study ecology, you haven't got a huge number of great career prospects. So you need to try and, if you're trying to earn a living out of the environment, or something that you're passionate about in that regards, it's quite challenging. So the main attraction was the fact that it was a paid job doing the conservation work, the first part of it.
Right.
The second part I kind of dreaded because I had to go and do my summer mountain leadership things, which I didn't come naturally. I wasn't exactly a renowned mountaineer, but had to learn a load of skills that I was unfamiliar with, and then be responsible for a bunch of 18 to 20-year-olds.
For how long?
About 12 weeks, and take them into wilderness areas and take them diving and things like that. I mean, there were some cool things, like learning all my diving qualifications on the back of it was great.
But you didn't like you that terrified you more to have to be responsible for all those people.
The thought of it at the beginning, so I certainly didn't go for that job because of that component, but obviously to the company that was the attraction to. That was probably the attractive part to the kids, that once they do their 6 to 8 weeks project work, the surveys and the community work and things like that, I'm sure they all wanted to contribute something back, but I'm also pretty sure that they were much more excited about going diving, and off Tofu Beach or something like that in Mozambique, or looking at Victoria Falls, or go on safari in Botswana.
Yeah, seeing great big animals.
Wild camp, all that kind of stuff. So that was a bit that they obviously were able to make, I suppose, the company was able to make their money from. And so you had an obligation to do that part as well. And that was a part in the end that I really loved as well, because the kids were actually great, fun. Yeah. I was probably quite a reckless leader, actually, but we got away with it and we all got on.
But you realised at one point you actually wanted to stay in an African country, and you chose to stay.
Yeah, well, the first time I ever went to an African country, East African country, it was Tanzania when I was still at university, and Kate, my partner, had encouraged me to enter some Earthwatch fellowship award thing, and put this application into the Earthwatch Institute, which is a sort of environmental charity, which at the time was attached, I think, briefly with Oxford. I might be wrong, or Cambridge. I should know that, one or two. Can't remember. It doesn't matter. And they had various projects around the world, including some in parts of Africa, where renowned researchers and scientists were running long-term projects, and you normally had to pay to go on that, but if you got a scholarship or you won this fellowship, then a few people got to go over there and for free and go and spend time. So I won one, and I picked a project in the Eastern Usambara Mountains in Tanzania, up on the where we were looking at fragmented rainforests and then certain bird species, interior bird species and things. But it was beautiful, sort of fragmented by the tea estates, but the tea estates themselves.
What's the tea estates?
Where obviously where people grow tea and
tea.
Tea, yeah. So there'd been a lot of deforestation to plant the tea, but so ecologically it's a bad thing. But the backdrops of that, where you have mountains with rainforest on, and then tea estates in between, and these sort of windy, undulating roads that are red with the soils, were up in the mountains, was beautiful. So it's a really lovely place to start. It was very friendly, very rural, remote. So remote that I remember having to make a phone call home once, and there was one phone in the entire sort of, 30-mile radius, and he went into this little old run-down post office, mud brick, etc., and went onto one of those they actually had to ring through and use the switchboards, to get back. Yeah. So that was kind of cool. But yeah, because of the friendliness and because of the imagery and the vivid colours and the exotic tropical environments that we experienced, and after that went on a little holiday down to Zanzibar and all that exotica that you feel when you land on an island like that. It kind of got under your skin.
Yeah.
And so the drawback to a part of Africa was already made even before I left university, really. The draw to go back, I should say. And obviously it's the continent where there's megafauna and these exciting giant animals that don't really exist anywhere else.
Yeah, which is part of what you studied and what you're passionate about. Right?
Yeah, to a degree. I was, funny enough, much more passionate about plants, very geeky. And
I know, you told me that.
Yeah, and in the UK at least, probably not that. I was a pretty good botanist at the time. I can still do botanical surveys, but I just loved. Basically, it came from when I was a kid growing up, where we grew up in the South World, right in that beautiful sort of special area of conservation, which is down on the Blythe estuaries and all those things, just laying down in amongst all the vegetation and looking up at the skies and hearing all the nature around you, and that kind of being in amongst all those plants, I think got in. And then the next logical step was to try and understand them, not to record them, so to speak, but to try and understand something, to try and, I suppose, protect it and know what it needs and things like that.
Yeah,
you know, how to ensure it survives.
That really blew me away when we were in Malawi together, and you were telling me about how kind of it was exciting to be there with all the fauna and plant life, but there's still a lot that's actually been lost. A lot of and especially you told me about how in England we've lost so much. Like kind of mosses and certain plants and certain that's true, right? I mean,
yeah.
I remember you telling me that. It really blew me away, like how in so many over a certain period of time, with all the pollution that we've lost a lot of kind of.
Yeah, I mean in Malawi issues are slightly different. I mean it's there's a lot. It's got a terrible deforestation rate, extreme deforestation rate. It's not really getting any better. And that's largely driven, from development and business and things, and the fact that there's few alternatives for fuel. In the UK, obviously, a much longer time period ago, a lot of those forests and things were cleared, obviously for different reasons, whether it was boat building or support for the war, agriculture, all that sort of stuff. But we lost a huge amount of botanical and flora and fauna in between the wars and after the wars for that. And since then we've lost a lot more, or as much, in terms of modern agriculture and pesticides and herbicides. And even when we were kids around this area in Suffolk, when you drive around in the night with the lights on, when your dad was driving or something, you'd have to wipe the windscreen and all the moths would be splattered all over the screens. And that doesn't happen at all. No. There's no insect life, and there's no, winter flocks on the stubble fields because there's no stubble left anymore. There's winter wheat, like birds, all the farmland birds, flocks of birds. The starlings that used to appear on all the telegraph line, telephone lines, in their hundreds and thousands, and now tiny, all that stuff. So there's been a dramatic loss of in numbers and to a large extent diversity of species. If you're talking about mosses, I think maybe referring to lichens and things like that, those lower plants and bryophytes that get impacted.
So you lost me there.
Lichens is like it looks like a crusty moss, I suppose. It's the best way to describe it. But they grow on trees and they're very affected by air pollution. So in industrial areas, particularly in the 70s, they realised a dramatic loss in diversity of lichens, which and since air pollution has improved slightly in places, these species are coming back.
So that makes me think of one of my songs, "All That We Are," when I'm sort of looking at the world from this ecological standpoint a little bit, and the opening line is looking out upon horizons. I see buildings for miles and miles, and just sort of questioning where we are at as humanity. Like, what's your viewpoint on that? How humanity's footprint on the world, and how you feel about it coming from that perspective?
Well, like most environmentalists, I suppose, I wouldn't say it's looking rosy right now. And that's something that we have to to always try and motivate ourselves, because often we feel that we're, you put all this effort in and you've got this passion and desire, and sometimes you get very emotional about it, and you don't necessarily have the control to change things. But at the same time, I do see some hope, and in the worst case scenario out of a disaster, there will be a shift in probably general mindset of the importance of how urgent the situation is and how life-supporting natural systems are, and potentially that disaster and the tragedies that it instigates on many may then actually end up being the catalyst that we need for change. I mean, we saw some of that with COVID, didn't we? And the changes in behaviour, and then very quickly you ended up with whales back on shipping lanes, and all the things that were sort of lost, and we, so there's that side, and there's also the fact that there are lots of amazing people out there, and a lot of youngsters that are coming through that are super passionate about these things and are very vocal. And
do you come across a lot of people like that?
Yeah, we do. I mean, and a lot of people interested to join in our work, and there's some really inspiring people and organisations and things.
We should just talk a little bit like fast forward a little bit as to where you are at now from where you started off by a bit of your time in Africa, like, because then from doing that stuff.
Okay. If we open that door, this cat is going to go out. And then he won't bother you unless you're okay. Yeah, he can't get out to his cat flap.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, so we should need to just fast forward a little bit your life to where you're at now, from where you, because then you settled in Malawi, and then you, I don't know how it came about, but you said, and you are now the CEO of the Lilongwe Wildlife Reserve or Trust.
Lilongwe Wildlife Trust. There's a bit of a tongue twister, isn't it?
Yeah.
Lilongwe, capital of Malawi.
LWT.
Yeah, LWT.
And so, how did you get to that point from being a guide?
Well, I mean, in large part thanks to my partner Kate, really, because we were at the point, we were living in London actually, in between. I came back from working on contracts and things over in Southern Africa, and started a master's at King's College and quit, thankfully. It was extremely boring, and then ended up working as an ecologist for a consultancy, but used that time to then do a part-time master's in very geeky subjects like botany and studying dormice and things like that. But during that time, we realised, as much as it was fun in London, that it wasn't a forever place for us, and so we started looking. I think 4 or 5 years, we're like, we need to do something else, and we started looking. And I'd always wanted to go back to Malawi.
Why?
Well, I'd heard it was just a beautiful place, extremely friendly people, stunning landscapes, and there's something. I mean, you've been to Malawi, and it immediately impacts on you how the warm heart of Africa is the cliche, but it really is a lovely, welcoming place for travellers and tourists and other people, so that was the primary objective, to try and see if we can go to Malawi, but we didn't just want to go and go travelling and grow a load of braids and things and bum around. So we were trying to go there and see if we could contribute in a way or work, and luckily Kate, through some of her contacts with a wildlife NGO in the UK, was offered the opportunity to go and help this, what we were told is a stalling wildlife sanctuary rescue centre in Lilongwe, with some, with a bit of a business plan and marketing plan and things like that. And so that felt like as good a place as any to start. So we went over there on that premise, and we were going to go there for 3 months. And cut a long story short, the leadership in that organisation changed. We didn't help them out, I promise. But we didn't elbow them out. But we ended up sort of taking over. There's a longer story behind that, but and then 3 months turned into 12 years living in Malawi, and now although in the UK we're still permanent residents and travel backwards and forwards.
Yeah, and you noticed at one point that there was more to be done than just taking care of the actual trust itself.
Yeah, well, when we started at Lilongwe Wildlife Trust, it was a single project, or half-finished single project, which was Malawi's only, and it still is only, and fully accredited sort of wildlife rescue centre. So, primates like monkeys and baboons and, serval cats and all sorts of animals, even a baby elephant once, but, would come in, they were injured or they were orphaned animals, and they need to be rescued and rehabilitated, and then in time try to return them back into the wild, into protected areas and things. When we went over there wasn't really any facilities at the sanctuary, and so the orphan care centre and the vet centre was our house. So we had several cats in a lounge and a duiker in the bathroom. And
what's a duiker?
It's like a small antelope.
Okay.
And there were operations happening on the kitchen table to try and save injured monkeys and things. It was kind of crazy. But so the first objective was to try and work with with the amazing staff that we inherited, I suppose, and the board of trustees that helped oversee it and set it up in the first place in around 2007, I think it was, and we arrived early 2009 or 2008, something like that. Was to finish that facility. So get all the enclosures done, build a vet clinic, get some kind of financial sustainability and core income in so it could sustain itself. Build education centres, and make it into one of Africa's best wildlife sanctuaries, which I have proudly say it is today.
Really?
It's one of the only fully accredited rescue centres by GFAS, which is Global Federation of Animal Sanctuaries.
Okay, and was that your objective that you made together?
That was the primary objective, because it was the basis on which you could launch the rest of it. So obviously with a sanctuary or a rescue centre, the animals that are coming in there it's not difficult to realise that they're coming in as victims of some form of wildlife crime. And if you're the objective of any rescue centre or sanctuary is to have no animals, obviously, because then you're doing your job. You don't really want any animals or wildlife in there, because then you've solved the problem, haven't you? Yeah. But if animals keep coming in, then okay, the sanctuary is very busy, the rescue centre is very busy, but then you've got a big problem in the country, because why these animals keep coming in? Why do they need to be confiscated by government? Why do they, why are they being surrendered? And so it didn't take a genius to realise that we needed to move on from being this reactive one project rescue facility.
To try and
understand the drivers and the root cause of it, and that led to us really understanding that we had to address policy and legislation connected to the protection of wildlife, and really try and tackle wildlife crime. And so that started off with illegal pet trade and primates, but an information that came from that ultimately led to information on other sort of international trafficking components, like the trade in ivory or rhino horns and pangolins and things like that. And so organically we ended up working with government partners who were willing and proactive and progressive enough to try and tackle those more serious crimes.
Just give me an idea of how bad it is, or the most common things or you'd find that you'd see, like animals, the kind of ways in which they'd be either abused or maltreated, or
so in terms of the
most common?
Unfortunately, in terms of the rhino and elephants, ivory trade, those animals are obviously dead and they're byproducts that are being sold. But in terms of the live animal trade, which is often pet trade, although pangolins are the most trafficked mammal, I think, in the world, and certainly out of Africa.
What are they trafficking them for?
They're trafficking them for sometimes meat, but the meat is often consumed at the source country. But they're trafficking the scales primarily for a couple of things. But it's meant to have, particularly in Asian cultures is meant to have a beautifying effect on the skin, to scrape your skin with pangolin scales, and they also make them into jewelry, and it's like a high status artifact that you can wear and make into something. So all ornamental purposes and I suppose purposes of beauty and vanity and things like that.
Yeah, right.
So there is obviously some Chinese or traditional medicine components as well to pangolin. But yeah, so the live animal trade means that obviously animals inevitably are kept in utterly deplorable conditions. We've had primates that are chained around a neck and skinny and cuts everywhere and totally malnutritioned and have got stereotypical repetitive behaviours where they can't interact. They might, I don't know. I mean,
I remember when I came to the trust in Malawi, and I met Bella, the tiger, who you'd rescued from somewhere.
It was a lion, yeah, no tiger.
Sorry,
yeah.
A lion, yeah, a female lion, yeah.
Yeah.
Rescued from somewhere in.
So that was before my time. Yeah. So those. She was a rescue that was coordinated by one of our original supporters at the sanctuary, which was the Born Free Foundation, who was actually the organisation that was connected to Kate, and it was supported through funding to them by a family called the Olsons, who still support us very generously today. But those international rescues, that she came from a Romanian zoo, awful conditions, and was then rehomed to Africa, I suppose. But that was very much a few years before our time. To be honest, they gorgeous animals, amazing that we did that. But one of the things that we decided to do after we took over, Kate and I, was basically to try and ensure that rescue facility and that sanctuary space was kept available for, Malawian wildlife and animals rather than. So we kind of have a change of tact in time. So Bella, when she passed away, very old age, was an amazing animal. I mean, my son used to love going up and interacting with her.
It's beautiful. But she had loads of cigarette stubs in her.
Oh, back in Romania, awful. Yeah, they were stubbed out, one eye, things thrown at her, all that sort of stuff. But that also happens in Malawi with animals that are chained and tethered. And I remember one baboon was so skinny that I could literally put my hand, thumb to finger, almost round its stomach, round its thing. It was that emaciated.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and where the rope had cut in so much and it had grown. That cut had gone, it was awful. There were some horrible things, pangolins with arms and legs that have been removed, and lost limbs, and.
So did you have a moment in time where, when you're connecting these dots, and then you realise that you could actually have a way, very bigger impact than what you originally thought you might be doing in this place? Or do you think you always had that long vision to get involved with the legislation and not get involved with that, but I mean, did you always have your eye on the much longer view? Or was there a moment you're like, oh, we're going to have to really change the way we're seeing this and step up? And
I think, first of all, when you work in a country like Malawi, and if you work in a field such as conservation and things, it's a very dynamic environment, and you're constantly having to think on your feet, and there's new problems and challenges that come up all the time. So you definitely can't set a 5-year plan and think you're going to have sail smoothing. You need to basically adapt, and the Lilongwe Wildlife Trust is very good at that, adapting to needs and coming up with sort of quick solutions to address those. But certainly at the beginning, one thing that was different, I suppose, with me and Kate when we were appointed by the board, was that we had a vision at the beginning, not knowing exactly what it was, but certainly a vision to build a wider environmental conservation related charity from the sanctuary, as opposed to just run a sanctuary. And it felt there was an opportunity there because it's 180 hectares right in the centre of a capital city, and therefore access to government departments and unbelievable numbers of school kids. I think we end up at 20,000 a year come through, So there's
let's just say it again. Like, so you've got this you've got 180 hectares, or is it acres?
Hectares. Yeah.
Right in the middle of the city,
Mm.
and then you've started to. Wait, you haven't started, but it's now a place where tons of school children are coming through and learning about.
Yeah, and obviously there's the rehab side, which is separate from that, to make sure that those animals aren't disturbed and can be returned back to the wild if they can. But there is obviously a whole area of beautiful woodland and indigenous woodland and habitat, and areas where we have guides and educational events and a whole education centre and facilities and amphitheatres and things where people can come and learn and engage in nature and embrace themselves and walking trails. It's a really beautiful site in the middle of the city. So that was it. It felt fairly obvious that Malawi didn't really have at the time an organisation that was very progressive and at the forefront of conservation. It seemed to be some of the organisations that were involved were quite specific in certain themes, or had a kind of, have to be, I don't want to be, but quite a colonial feel about them as well. And so there was an opportunity there, and it wasn't an opportunity to go and build a career, because for years we were earning literally $100 each or something a month at best. But it was an opportunity to feel like, wow, there was an opportunity here to have a real impact in this country, because within 5 minutes of flying in and looking over the country, you can see that there were challenges with deforestation and habitat issues and pollution, and it didn't take long to realise that Malawi was Southern Africa's principal transit hub for wildlife trade and trafficking. Transit hub, so like a depot for product from around the region coming in and then being distributed out, and Malawi was central to all of that, so therefore had a really key role to play in that supply chain, and an opportunity to disrupt that supply chain both up and down.
It was partly because of its geographical location, being in the middle of like 3 or 4 major countries, but also the fact that it had such crappy laws about people getting caught with certain.
Well, certainly, it had laws that were how do I say it? They had laws which had a lot of issues, so they could easily be challenged in court or interpreted differently, and so they were weak in that regards. And the enforcement of that law, particularly with wildlife crime, was almost non-existent. And that wasn't necessarily because there wasn't a desire from the government agency responsible, DMPW, to do that. It was just a general lack of awareness and understanding of how serious some of these issues are, both in terms of the crime itself and the impact on nature and the impact on those animals, but also on how important it is to protect those animals, to protect those forests, to ensure that in countries like Malawi, where so many millions of people are dependent on forests or climate-based agriculture, how important it is to protect those rivers, protect those forests, and protect those animals within it. And so
what did you do?
Well, interestingly, one of the first things we did was try to, whilst there was stuff going on in the background about finding out more information about the certain types of trade and things that were happening, but was to raise awareness of the issue of wildlife crime and to suggest. So Kate started and pulled together this really amazing sort of public awareness campaign, and brought in some support from, I think it was at the time, what's called now the FCDO, the British High Commission, and various things. And this campaign kicked off from there around 2012, 2013, and has been sustained ever since, to the extent that there's just endless media articles now around nature and climate and conservation, biodiversity, and very much, I think, LGBT, with others, but was very much at the centre of putting nature, which was never mentioned, or conservation wildlife anywhere in the papers, literally on the front page at times. So it became part of the public conscious that these were real issues, and to a certain degree these are real serious crimes. And then that enabled us to start approaching parliamentarians and decision makers around the possibility of strengthening the laws.
Yeah. Just since you mentioned the media, did social media play a big role in getting the word out there as well, or was it more directly media? I mean, you know, we live in a world where we all have to have a social media account. We all have to kind of be posting stuff every day. And I follow the LWT and see that they're putting stuff out there. But do you think that helps at all? Do you think there's giving much? I asked the question based on a song of mine called Algorithms and how they play a role in our life today.
Mm-hmm.
And we're used to it in, you know, thinking of it in terms of modern culture, being texting our mates and this and that and stuff. But, you know, in terms of, there's also, you know, Peter Gabriel, he started the Witness and where people could catch other people's crimes on with videotapes and stuff like that back in the 90s.
That's a cool idea.
Yeah. And now that's kind of happening through social media as well.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering if that was ever relevant to what you guys did.
So there is a component of using digital campaign materials and social media, but what was good about social media was trying to gauge over time the public support for your cause.
Yeah.
So, for example, when there was discussions that we were supporting early on about maybe putting a lot of the ivory stockpile out of economic use in Malawi, there was just utter outrage about why you would do that. And when
Hang on a second, just to understand what is it
so
I didn't quite catch what you said there.
So
ivory stockpile.
Malawi, like many African countries and other countries around the world, you know, have wildlife products that are, because of CITES and other international legal instruments, are illegal to trade internationally without, well, to put it simply, I mean, there are ways. But anyway, so essentially these are then stored in stockpiles and kept. And so there is a strong argument that it would be better on many levels, and there are other arguments against it, but to put those stockpiles out of economic use. And one way to do that is to destroy those stockpiles. So there was a very famous Kenyan burning of ivory, tons and tons and tons and tons of ivory, a few years ago. That you can look up on Google and see all the very iconic images of these piles of ivory being burnt. And Malawi was thinking about that actually way ahead of Kenya back in 2014. And
you mean burning it before it got out of the country?
I mean burning it to destroy it, to put it out of economic use, so it couldn't necessarily, as a symbol that, you know, they wouldn't tolerate trade.
Yeah.
And Malawi is a country extremely progressive and advanced in how they've tackled illegal wildlife trade, and actually they're sort of pioneers within Southern Africa, Southern and Eastern Africa, I would say. So my point being about social media was that when these things were being discussed as this, you know, trying to gauge public and political support, there was outrage back in 2014, absolute outrage, as there was when people started being arrested for, say, trading ivory and going to prison for maybe a couple of years or whatever it was at the beginning. You know, people just didn't understand it. They thought it was an absolute disgrace and all the rest of it.
But for what reason? I mean, where were they?
Because they didn't
from?
really understand, you know, the importance of the seriousness of wildlife crime, how it's connected to other serious crimes, other serious trades like guns and drugs and things that high levels of corruption that destabilise society. You know, and also the importance of protecting that wildlife, because what it represents that a forest has been destroyed or a river's been polluted or whatever it may be. So these things were not in a consciousness. They weren't in a, there's nothing in primary schools. You know, there was nothing in primary schools. There was nothing in the media. Hence why these public awareness campaigns and education became important objectives for our organisation and others. But the role of social media and algorithms and things that you're talking about is, over time, gauging that shift in what would be considered, I suppose, a social norm. So social norm at the beginning would be to very much say, what the hell are you bothering even caring about this issue? And we should be selling this, and we should be doing this, and we should be eating all these animals, because in Malawi, in Techeru at least, the local language, Nyama, basically the word for animal is meat. They're the same word.
Oh, right, really?
So changing that sort of mindset to a large extent, that exploitative, which, I mean, there is obviously sustainable reasons to consume and all of that stuff, but I'm saying there was a general perception that the natural world, I'm not going to get into any religious concept, but I've got my own feelings on it. This natural world is there to be used by man, and maybe that's a Western religion influence onto various societies about the position of certain things in Christianity and stuff. But anyway, these things were tested before, and then a few years later, when you on social media, you get out and the whole shift in attitudes was amazing. The support that you get for it. So we use those to gauge public support for campaigns, to get feedback on certain campaigns that were put out there, and to gauge what support you got. And obviously, in time, what we'd see in our supporters is where it was originally a lot of expats or internationals, very kindly like yourself and others. A lot more Malawians, a lot more national people following us and supporting those causes, and that kind of thing is great to see. In terms of using social media to understand the audience is really important. Mm-hmm. Using that social media to understand your audience and tweak campaigns.
Because you have a direct communication with their...
And you can see those arguments, and you can see, and it's uncensored, so you can see their feedback, and you have to understand why they feel like that.
So you actually created this sort of a paradigm shift within the country in a way, in terms of people's perspective, the way of outlook on this.
We definitely helped to do that. 100%. We've played a very significant part in that with other organisations, but I would say we kind of really helped pioneer that.
Yeah, cool.
In partnership with government, obviously.
And when you're talking, I mean, we can say that you've gone in there to protect. That's your main objective, is to try and protect in terms of animals and flora and fauna. You're trying to look at protecting what there is, what Earth is given, as it were. Do you think when you're talking about being, the kind of attitudes you immediately get back, do you think it's possible to be overprotective, to go in too hard or too strong? But also, can we be overprotective with this kind of stuff, do you think?
Yeah, we can. And
because there's got to be a moment
there's a whole, I mean, obviously it's a very complex, it's a good question. It's a very complex thing to think through, but it depends a lot on your own personal ethics and your morals and various things and what you feel are priorities. Now, take an individual. Someone might feel that every individual animal, should never be suffering cruelty. I think I agree with that. There shouldn't be apparent cruelty on animals and things, and others don't. Others other priorities. Wildlife Trust started off and still does amazing work on individual animal level, protecting its welfare, and that's brilliant. Me as an ecologist and a conservationist, I've always had a tendency to lean towards trying to solve those bigger sort of species or habitat level issues. And in terms of can we go over the top with that protection, I think there is an argument you definitely can. If you're, for example, on the enforcement side, if you're too heavy-handed and maybe a law's toughened and then it's enforced to such an extreme that there are perceived injustices in that, maybe in sentencing, or your sentencing's leading to breaking up families and accelerating poverty. These are really important considerations to take. And so our work has never been one to focus on sort of lower level supply chain. When we're working on helping to counter illegal wildlife trade, the programs that we initiate are focused to support government tackling with sort of corruption and higher level operators, so that the drivers are more to do with power and influence and greed and money than they are to do with sustenance and energy and day-to-day living. And then also we've campaigned and brought in lots of legal tools and things to make sure that, although, for example, maybe the sentencing under an act in a court is deterrent, but it's not counterproductive by being too extreme. That's proportionate. So bringing in things like sentencing guidelines and training for judicial officers and prosecutors and all those kind of things to try and ensure that what you're not doing is sending someone that might go and want to poach a guapi, a duiker, a little small antelope, and he's going to prison for 10 years. And that's not the objective of this.
Yeah.
But someone that's potentially head of an organised crime network that's transporting tons of ivory from across the region out of Malawi, it's appropriate that they do go to prison for a longer period of time potentially.
So just give us a little example of the laws you changed in Malawi and how that's affected, what that led to in terms of the big stories, in terms of,
Well, we helped strengthen, first of all, the Wildlife Act and the main Wildlife Act and got rid of some of those anomalies and inconsistencies, and we also strengthened the penalty section, and it went from a fairly weak act into something which potentially, if you committed one of the most serious crimes, up to 30 years in prison, which is now I think one of the strongest.
That's what it is now. It wasn't.
Before
it was what?
It was an option of a fine or a custodial sentence. So often they were just fines, and the most common sentence that was passed in the courts, if you have found trafficking ivory or rhinos, we found when we did a lot of research, looked at all the court cases, was a $40 fine.
Wow.
So
$40.
You literally would plead guilty, pay the fine, and go home for tea.
And could you take the ivory home? Would they?
No, well, they would confiscate, would go into the stockpile. But we talked about earlier. But ultimately, there was absolutely no deterrence whatsoever.
So now it's 30 years.
And so there is, I'm not going to go into it. We've actually done a report on the deterrence impact of our work with various universities. And, there is a genuine deterrent effect in certain in certain groups. Yeah. If you do certain things like tackling higher level arresting and potentially imprisoning, but particularly arresting higher level sort of more dangerous or perceived or bigger players, that tends to have a deterrent impact, it seems, when government do that down that supply chain. And so, it is important. That's led to the arrests of big ivory and run-hill traffickers in Malawi, and their imprisonment has led
They're not from Malawi, though, are they?
No, they're often foreign nationals, maybe Asian nationals. Often, unfortunately, I don't want to name countries, but often Chinese. But the reality is that because Malawi is in this transit country and that ivory is coming from all these other countries, from Mozambique and Zambia and Tanzania as well as itself, it has an impact on helping protect all of those populations of those animals and therefore the habitats that they help sustain as part of natural ecosystems in those respective countries and within Malawi. So Malawi's populations of these animals, not just thanks to our work, but other people that are doing actual protected area management in the country as well. But that collective improvement has meant that we're one of the few countries where we have increasing populations now of these iconic species, which is really exciting.
Yeah,
cool.
That's great. It's amazing.
Yeah.
But so you've been really active and central in having major laws changed and then being, I don't want to say responsible, but being the figurehead, as it were, for, having people put away and in prison and all that sort of stuff. That must have, when you lived there, put a lot of attention on you and being a family man now. You and Kate have a family. You had your first son there, I think. Yeah. And then you've got 2 kids, like me. Did you ever worry about that? Was that ever a concern for you both?
Yeah, it was a concern.
Like your own protection for yourselves.
It was.
About protection.
It was a concern. It has been a concern, and I have friends who have lost their lives doing similar work, and I suppose the work of an activist, environmental activist, is very dangerous, actually. Big business doesn't like it, big criminal gangs don't like it, because you end up impacting, their incomes. Obviously, we were quite public in our support of the government agencies that are doing this work, and we're quite influential in training and building capacity in those officers, and we're quite public in the court system, and so that led to it led to quite significant attention, and it's the primary reason why we now run the organisation from the UK.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
because it was not so safe to live there.
Yeah, it wasn't so safe.
You lived there for how many years?
Lived there from 2000 and late 2008, I think it was, early 2009 through to, it was 10 years, May 2019.
Right.
Yeah.
And it was just before COVID that you came back?
It was a year before COVID, yeah.
Oh, yeah,
so, yeah. Yeah.
And so there's a song of mine called Exile, as I mentioned before, and it's, I live in France. I'm living as a self-exiled person. You were. When I went and visited you both, I had the impression that you, in your minds at that point in time, which was 2013, I think it was.
Yeah.
You were really. There was no conversation about coming home. I mean, you were really loving living there.
No, and we wouldn't have come home. We were very happy in Malawi, and a bit like you at times, particularly at the beginning, you might have felt, and you always. It's very hard to integrate completely into a new culture, as I'm sure you know, and language is really important for that.
Absolutely.
But Malawi is a very welcoming country overall, and the work was just very rewarding, and you could see the impact of it, and unlike in the UK and other places, you were able to, I suppose, move within areas of influence easier. You could influence change. There's no way I could go and change a law in the UK, or have dinner with a president or something like that. But
which you have done in Malawi.
In Malawi, yeah. But the reality is that it did feel at home. I probably felt exiled towards the end because my personal movement was more restricted by some of the issues that we just touched upon, and so at times I felt like I was imprisoned in my own home in Malawi, and
sort of COVID before COVID.
Before, I had a lockdown before the lockdown was even fashionable.
For how long you couldn't go out?
At night for a while, well over a year.
A
18
year?
months, yeah.
You couldn't go out at night?
I used to do stuff, but it was recommended not to do so, yeah.
So it was pretty serious, the kind of the risk you could be taking by...
It was, yeah. And it accumulated after government had made some arrests of some fairly high-profile, long-standing foreign traffickers, ivory, rhino, horn traffickers in the country, and it particularly peaked. And that happened in May 2019, and it sort of peaked. So by the end of that month, it was particularly challenging, and we were in a situation where we had to leave the country.
Yeah, which must have been really hard, because you've also, not only have you built up all that, the whole foundation, the trust and everything, but you've also had your kids there as well. So
our life was there, and our home was where we lived in Malawi. That was where we had our first kids. It's where, and also all the staff and everything we built up, not from scratch, because some of that sanctuary work had been done, and the trustees and the previous manager had done a good foundation to get things moving, but it very much felt like the wider organisation that Kate and I had developed with all of our amazing team, obviously, but basically that was our baby and we were leaving it. And at that time, we obviously had the intention we were going to go back, but we didn't know when, and then COVID happened and it felt desperate. And funny enough, out of that tragic of COVID, and we a lot of our funding is private funders, and suddenly they were worried about the values of their stocks and shares. And so I think at one point when COVID hit, for example, I think our income, which is, so I think we lost about $3 million or something in about 48 hours, 72 hours.
What?
They were like, "Oh, we don't think we can give you this. We can give you that. We don't give you that." So, and we had to. So I had to think
totally
on our feet.
Depend on that.
Yeah, but it made us diversify and think and go to other people and be creative how we did it. And we came through it, and we actually had a really good year financially, funnily enough, and kept all our staff and kept them all employed. And with the kick on of Zoom, and I probably can't, but all the sort of platforms and TeamViewer, suddenly the world meant that you could run something remotely, and so it enabled us to still be able to be not as effective, but almost as effective. And the organisation had to adjust to that and adjust to that change,
which is probably
really difficult.
Difficult, but a good thing.
But the whole world was doing it at the same time.
Yeah,
so actually, it wasn't as challenging as it would have been if the rest of the world wasn't doing it at the same time. So we were kind of lucky in that regards. And it felt that at one point we were going to lose our home, lose our friends, lose the baby that we built up, the organisation and the passion and the country. But we slowly realised that actually although we would lose our home and we'd lose, our physical home, we could still go backwards and forwards once COVID was over, and but we could still retain our jobs and things that we love, and try to do what we can to steer the organisation in the right way. Yeah. So that was a bonus, Brucey bonus.
Brucey bonus, mate.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice. I know you as a friend of mine, someone who can be in the middle of a sort of shitstorm and a difficult situation and remain quite calm.
Mm-hmm.
And we've only skated on the surface of the difficult times that you've been through and how and what you've done. But what do you think the hardest moment was in that entire period in Malawi? What's been the most the biggest storm you had to face?
I suppose there's been a few, but one of the biggest ones was when I actually got the job and realised that I was in charge of 220 wild animals and had no idea how to look after them. Got no veterinary experience whatsoever, got no husbandry whatsoever. So again, at one point I was having to dart baboons with a dart gun to try and not. So anyway, thinking on your feet, growing.
Finish that. Thought.
Yeah, running around, dart a baboon that needed one of my animal cats. Boss, this baboon. And you're like, well, Jesus Christ, and then had to go up there and try and. Poor baboon. I actually got it right with a blowpipe right in its arse. It was a good shot. But very quickly employed people to do that.
I see you were right in the deep end. Yeah, because you were basically...
Yeah, we got the job. Oh, shit, we got like 45 staff and 220 animals and it's half finished and what the hell are we doing? So that was a sort of...
but that's crazy.
A eureka moment of like, right, be careful what you wish for because... We're kind of fucked now. we got to get this done. There's literally lives and animals and international people watching us. It's like this could be a major cock up. Could go either way. Yeah, but it didn't. It went the right way because we got the sense to delegate things that we're not very good at.
So because I'm kind of surprised that the answer to that question is going so far back in time, relating saying that. It's when you got the job, that's the biggest storm that you went through, and you've just gone through this whole thing of telling me about getting like getting
the hardest thing we did was probably changing the law. I just cannot tell you how hard that was. It was just such a complicated thing to do. There was a moment when I was in a bit of trouble live on TV in Parliament, and I was allowed. The members of Parliament were it was Parliament was live, and all the members were in the chambers, and because they were going to try and pass, it was suggested the act that we helped lead was going to get passed. Someone very kindly in one of the parliamentary committees said, "I'll get you access into the viewing thing and you can watch it," which you're not really meant to do, but it was really kind. But because I realised this might be a historic moment, and it was such a a difficult thing to try and do. I mean, honestly, the process itself, and then trying to combat some of the corruption and other stuff. Honestly, it was exhausting. But anyway, I decided I might just film the moment when it passed, which was a mistake because I was in Parliament and you're not allowed to film. And then soon one of the MPs, this is all going out on live TV, just stood up and went, "Speaker, there's a gentleman up there filming." And then everyone in Parliament looked up. All the TV cameras sort of followed up. So I was on national TV having filmed it, and I just went, "Oh, sorry," and then had to sit there, and then the speaker said, "Right, that's illegal, deal with it." And I just watched the security people who were down in the chamber go dun 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 dun. I could almost imagine the sound of them coming up the steps, do 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 do, and then I was escorted out. So that was a bit of that moment. I thought I was, well, it wasn't a pickle, but it was a very embarrassing situation, and
especially as it was a huge moment for you as well.
Yeah,
like,
so
really
I was ego and thinking, oh yeah, I could show my son this one day, which I've probably lost it now. You take pictures on the phone and video on the phone,
never look again.
So anyway, and then there's been, honestly, in Malawi, I wish Kate was here because we could probably list it out, just endless ones. We've been in car chases. We've had buildings burned down and we've had to put it out. We've had dangerous animals escape. We had a baboon once escape and run round the local hospital in Lilongwe, and it was running wild in the wards, and we had to go and dart it.
Did anybody get hurt?
And catch it? No, but just Sunday got a phone call. Baboons. All right, where is it? Oh, it's in the hospital. Escaped. Got out the perimeter fence, out the enclosure, out of another fence, out of the perimeter fence, ran across the thing, is now in the middle of the major general hospital in the city, just running around the wards going nuts, and everyone's screaming and going ballistic, and basically all the press are coming down and you're going to be ridiculed. So there was that. There's loads, honestly. That's what's so addictive, because every day there was some borderline disaster or cock up, but some amazing people that would solve it, and there was always and progress being made. I mean, it sounds like it's a calamity. It's not a calamity. It's an amazing organisation, but there's always crazy things going on.
You're dealing with a lot of people. You're dealing with a lot of animals.
Yeah,
dealing with a lot of politicians as well now. I mean, at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I've had some really hairy things. Serious robberies and. There's been some very dark moments as well, but overall, as I said, life less ordinary. That's the kind of thing it kept you going. But most importantly, because you could see progress.
Yeah.
And that's everyone. Not everyone has that luxury, I suppose, but everyone. If everyone did have that luxury to see the impact and the progress that their contributions to whatever they're doing is making, then that's really rewarding. And so from a selfish point of view, it's quite addictive in that regards, because you can see the fruits of your labour, so to speak.
Of course, but when your labours are actually affecting people and animals in a positive way, it's not really so negative, selfish. It's just a positive cyclic affair. It's a win-win. Okay, so last question I ask everyone is based on a song called Letter from My Future Self, where I imagine myself in his 80s writing me a letter today, and the song is talking about what I'd say to myself as a kind of means of advice or anything that I'd want to say. If you can just for a second imagine yourself in your 80s sitting down to write Johnny today a letter. Or Jonathan.
Jonathan. That's my mother. I don't think you've ever called me Jonathan.
Never called you Jonathan. Yeah. What would he say?
As advice, I think make sure that you pause long enough to really take stock of some of your achievements as you go along that journey, because I think too often we just moved forwards and constantly moving to try and reach a goal, and that goal always shifted. We attained it, and then we moved it, and then we moved it, and then we moved it. And in a way, it would have been nice, and is nice now to sit and really appreciate it. So I think we would have been kinder to ourselves, almost at times, worked ourselves into exhaustion and constantly going. I don't know if that's coming across well, but just make sure that you interject times of reflection to appreciate what you've achieved and what you're trying to achieve, and then also to get a perspective that you must work with others. You can't do everything yourself. You have to basically work with others and ensure that you really understand your motivations and your drivers, and that those motivations and drivers may change with time. For example, now it's as important for me to be a good father and a partner to Kate as it is to save Malawi's wildlife, and I need to ensure that I give equal time, or as much equal time, thought space, to doing that. And I suppose this is a roundabout way of, so the pause thing, and then also to make sure that
what thing?
Well,
the pause thing.
What I was just saying about making sure that you
pause. Yeah.
You take the time to stop and reflect and appreciate what you've achieved, but learn from that and make sure that you can improve or whatever it may be. And then the other thing is to just ensure that you have time in your life for something else other than just work, even if you love it. Because it can be all encompassing, and you realise before you know it, you're 43, 44 as you are. Time has flown, and although I absolutely love what I do, I also, love watching my son play football or being around. So be a little bit kinder to yourself.
Do you think you're taking heed of this advice at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't know. Yeah, I think so. Still work extremely hard. Still very passionate about it, but
you're not necessarily talking about quitting or stopping or anything like that. You're just talking about taking moments to reflect and using.
I'm taking moments to reflect.
Which is, I think, it's really intelligent, because we can't just stop.
No, and I wouldn't stop. You can't, if you're like you with your music, Charlie. You're just not going to not. You're not going to not play music, even if your music doesn't sell. You're still going to make music,
or even if it means I'm going to be touring and away from my family for half the year.
Whatever it is, you make those sacrifices. Exactly. So you're going to do that, but I suppose what I'm trying to say is to ensure that you get that balance. You get that balance right when. How do I say it? I mean, we probably need to do this bit again, to be honest. But
no, you've said it. It makes total sense. It's just about there's always something. Since I've written this album and we've been talking, meandering through the topics of the songs, one question that came up a lot for me when I started then finished making the record and started touring and stuff like that was, how do I find that balance between staying passionate for what I do, and but finding the place where I can let go of it as well. Like putting everything I've got into what I do when I do it, but not putting all my eggs in one basket, so much so that then I'm just spent.
Yeah, well, that's exactly the point. You have to, it's one of the points. If you don't be a little bit kinder to yourself and you don't find that room, then you'll burn out.
Yeah.
And if you're passionate about something, so I'll always be working in environmental causes. I always have a passion for Malawi. I always, love Lilongwe Wildlife Trust, and I will work as hard as I can to deliver what all those things need from me. But if you do it relentlessly without being kind to yourself and thinking, God, just reflect on that for a little bit before we move to the next one, or let's try and also introduce a little bit of balance for well-being, or a little bit of time. It's like you need that in order to be more effective, more productive. Maybe it's just as you get older. Certainly at the start at the beginning in your late 20s, early 30s, maybe you've got more energy. Maybe I'm just an old fogey. But the point is,
kids can change things.
All that sort of stuff. But it is important, I think, to make sure that your goals and ambitions change
equally,
with how your life evolves,
proportion to
with how your life evolves, I suppose.
Yeah. It's like it's letting go without giving up. You can't give up the fight, but you want to be able to let go and actually just appreciate yourself a bit and the life that you've chosen as well, all at the same time. And I think it's like being able to waver between those two. It's like sorry to sound like a Japanese proverb, but like a grass in the wind. You sort of, at one moment you're in the sun, another moment you're out of the sun, and you waver between those two.
Yeah, I think it's exhausting, like it is if you're making 4 albums, 5 albums, 6 albums. If you're doing tours like you're doing now, on 100 tours in 200 days or something, but like maybe even less days. But it can be exhausting. And if you're going to sustain that level of productivity for the cause, because of something you're passionate about, and I've been ever since I was tiny, that all I cared about was nature, really. And you need to be kinder to yourself for the long game, and to take the fight against maybe stuff in whatever the next chapter is, and I hope it doesn't end with LWT, but ultimately there are many causes that need, and there are very few environmentalists, and we need to take the bull by the horns. But to do that,
you got to stay. You can't burn out.
You can't burn out. Yeah. And so, if I was looking back on myself, there were moments where I felt burnt out. I felt distressed, and I was probably less effective, or I judged myself, badly because I hadn't achieved something, or hadn't achieved it as quick as I thought I would, or it had been counterproductive in some way. And the immediate response back then was to constantly tackle one thing after that. And it was great for productivity, but it actually, not only in myself, led to a few health challenges, but it bred a culture in LWT of other staff that would do that because they were just so passionate, and that was the energy that came off from and they had burnout,
it all feeds down,
and actually it wasn't a sustainable culture, so we had to change that a little bit. That's and really COVID almost took it one way that I wasn't happy with. It was like, hang on, guys, you're just being lazy as shit here. This needs to go. But ultimately, that balance had to be reached. So, if the question was about, the Lilongwe Wildlife Trust, which I thought it was, or career, that would be what I'd be telling to myself is, anyway. Long-winded, waffly answer to your question.
It was actually not. Well, it was not at all. It's just that I kept asking questions off the back of your answer, so don't worry. But anyway, it was a good chat.
Okay, cool.
Thanks for
good
having a chat.
I hope the album sells millions and millions.
That way, I'll never burn out, or maybe I will. No, actually, it always gets more busy when and they sell more. Let's hope it never sells, so I don't burn out.
No, but then you'll constantly have to be working to get the million selling album, whatever you call it. Is it platinum? What is the top thing now?
Diamond.
What do you have to get a diamond? Depends
on the country.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What's the hardest one? America?
I think diamond is the biggest. America must be around. I haven't got a clue actually. I think it's 200. I mean, these days it doesn't even really apply because no one buys records. So the records,
they just nick them off streaming sites.
It's all streaming, so no one's paying. So, but now apparently streaming. I mean, certainly digital sales count into digital and physical sales count into one pot. But it's so low. I mean, when I started first album, it was like diamond would have been 500,000, and now I think that's correct.
500.
Probably, yeah. You'll get platinum at 10.
Be great. You finally got it. You keep hanging in there, mate. You'll finally get that gold, that platinum thing to put on on the wall.
Yeah.
Just cover up the date. 2026. It was when it was 50.
Right.
Take me as I am. Don't you know